You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the 95 Podcast. This is Dale Sellers, Executive Director at 95 Network. Today I have a pastor friend with me, Michael Schooley, who is from upstate New York. We worked together in January doing a Soul Care Essentials Conference, and he's just got a good thing happening. And I think a lot of you would like to hear stories about good things that are happening. So Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Well, as I was saying that, there's just we just get bombarded with all the things that are wrong with everything. And when you find someone that's got a church that's healthy, I think it's good to kind of spend some time talking to that pastor and find out, has it always been healthy? Did you have to get it healthy? How you got there? And so that's kind of what I wanted to have you on the podcast today, because I did, when I was there, I was quite impressed with the serve nature of your church, with the attitude of the people. There were a lot of folks who volunteered, who helped us make those conferences go really well. And it comes from leadership. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, before we do that, kind of take a few moments, tell us about your story. Now, where is your church located now in upstate New York?
We are in Big Flats, which is right between Elmira and Corning. So it's kind of like the Twin Tiers. Some would know it by the Watkins Glen racetrack, but we're right there in the Finger Lakes.
Oh, so you're near racing. Well, then you're just as good as us others. Yeah.
Yeah, a little different than the South, but yeah.
Well, honestly, one of the things about where you live that if you are from the South and you've never been to upstate New York, you don't know. It looks just like it does here. It's gorgeous. You got rivers and mountains and a lot of hunting land, and it's beautiful there. I was completely blown away the first time I went to upstate New York, but when on the drive that I did with you guys when I was there, it's just beautiful up there.
Yeah, I'd say the major difference is we stay inside in the winter, where in the South you stay inside in the summer. Air conditioning versus heat, but there's a lot of similarities that way on the beauty side.
Yeah. Well, tell us your story.
Yeah, so I grew up in this area and fell in love with upstate New York. When I was in high school, I was involved in some youth ministry camps, and just remember at a camp just wanting something more in my faith. And so did some mission trips and all that throughout high school. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do post high school. And so I went to a Bible college thinking that it was a no loss situation. I could take a year or two, get to know God's word and kind of transition to wherever God wanted me next. 4 years into college, I realized that I had to make a decision, and ministry in my mind was not for me. I'm an introvert. I was a very shy high school and college kid, and hated speaking in front of people. In fact, the first time someone asked me to share a testimony or something, I think I said like 2 words and sat down. Like, it's great. Sat down. Like I just had no confidence and felt like ministry was not necessarily for me. I was counseling at a camp, which I loved, that kind of setting. And the youth pastor at that camp pulled me aside. It was like one of the last days. And he said he'd been praying all week about who God wanted him to talk to. And my name kept coming up. And he basically said that he knew I was wrestling with ministry. And then he shared a verse from Paul and 2 Corinthians, that my power is made perfect in your weakness. And I realized that was from God. Like, God had someone speak into my life, and I knew at that point that God wanted me to head into ministry in the midst of my weaknesses. And so I stepped into being a youth pastor in a city in Elmira, a town next door to where I am now. Our junior high ministry had 3 church kids and like 37 community kids at that time. And it was control. Youth ministry is controlled chaos. That was more chaos than control. And yet, for those kids, it was home. It was like a gathering place, a place where they could just come. Their families were a mess. Their lives were probably a little messy. But they felt like they were home. The church ended up splitting. And I was like 22 at the time. Was just beginning understanding what leadership was about. And so I was, I couldn't be in the middle of it. So my wife and I decided to leave the church and leave those 40 kids, which broke our heart with the 40 kids. But it wasn't a healthy situation for us to stay in. So we ended up moving down south, souther, if that's a word, to Chambersburg, PA. Spent 6 years there. Probably some of the deepest community I have. I have deep community in our church now, but there's something about having kids with other people having kids, and just enjoying that. We served together in the youth ministry. So I spent 6 years there. And in the midst of those 6 years, I kept thinking about New York and those 40 kids, and thinking about where they would go to church here. And there are some good churches in upstate New York.
Mm-hmm.
There's not enough good churches in upstate New York.
Got you.
Where I was in Chambersburg, I could walk 3 blocks in any direction and find a church of 400 to 1,000. Yeah. And although I was being used to disciple and develop people, there was something about my home area where I wanted to start a church for those who had no place to investigate their faith and feel at home and not feel judged. And so, although I felt inadequate and still, my personality temperament is not a D, and usually the D's back in those days were the ones that would start churches.
Yep.
I was on the lower spectrum, but God opened doors, and my wife and I took the jump and started a church in upstate New York, not knowing how it would turn out. And 17 years later, we're still here. And all the journey that has gone through, the ups and downs, God has been faithful. It was not like a automatic, we blew things up. It was like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps back, 2 steps forward. And God's been good along the way.
Did you have anyone guiding you when you started? Were you part of a launch team? Was there a organization that you were part of when you started, as far as being a church planner?
We were part of a denomination, the Church of God out of Findlay, Ohio. And so they financially backed us. But in many ways, it was a semi-parachute drop. We didn't have a core team. I had to come up to New York and kind of start meeting with people, trying to develop enough of a core team that we could really launch with. So we had before we could actually plant and step into moving back, we needed about 6 couples to say yes. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is we came up and we had 3 couples say yes. And so we were all excited. And that kind of confirmed we were going the right direction. None of those 3 couples actually came on our team. And so, but I think that's how God works sometimes. Like,
always that
what
way.
You expect to be the story is not the story. And yeah, we had an incredible group of people that God brought us, that many are still with our church today, which is a very unique thing, because they say most of your core team aren't there after 2 to 3 years.
Was there someone that you had that was mentoring you that you relied upon, or were you just like shooting in the dark?
Mentoring, I had someone who more on the personal side coached me. Mm-hmm. Are you dating your wife? How are you doing spiritually? Are you caring for your kids? Not so much on the coaching on the ministry side, although I think that's essential. Like I think you have to have both. Actually, I think you need to have a mentor and someone who's going to be. Are you taking your day off? Are you spiritually healthy to lead your church? And I did appreciate those conversations. He would actually ask my wife more than even me, like, how's he taking care of you? Which I appreciated because I needed that reminder.
If I could, determine how everyone does it, I would choose the route you went versus having the whole church planner model, because I think, so many of us just ignore our soul. We ignore, that's why we do the soul care conference, that we ignore our family. We ignore, and then, I think at times you almost get a badge of honor for doing that, which we should, because I think the route you took was probably the best route to go. Tell us about your family.
Yeah, so my wife Gina, we've been married for 25 years, coming up in 2 weeks.
Congratulations.
So excited about that. I have 3 kids in college, one about to get married, and I say this often, especially in the last season of my life, like, the proudest thing I have about ministry is that my kids have a hunger for Christ, and they have not, although they've grown up in our church, they love our church and they love Jesus. And That's always been my prayer, that the PK experience would be not lead them away from Christ, but really lead them toward Christ. And all three of them are doing really well spiritually. I have a fourth one who is doing well too. She's 10. And so we're still investing into her. She is our adopted daughter who we love and have walked that journey with her for the last 10 years. And so God's led our family of 4 kids has been really incredible. And they all love coming to worship to church with us.
What led you to adopt a kid after you'd pretty well raised your kids?
So there's a scripture in James about true religion being caring for widows and orphans. And as my wife and I prayed, we couldn't solve the whole system with all the kids, but we felt like God said, care for one. I don't remember what leader, I think it was Andy Stanley, who said, do for one what you can't do for all.
Yeah.
And so we're like, we can love one. We actually had a son who we fostered through the social service system for almost 2 years. He went back to be with his biological parents, which was as one of the hardest experiences we've had as parents, to have to kind of let one of our kids go back to an unhealthy environment, which has shaped all of our kids and us in a lot of ways. The other one we got to adopt, and just felt like God has given us space in our house and also the capacity to love one. And so we stepped, and it's been, I would say it's been the greatest journey we've ever been on and the hardest journey we've ever been on, all at the same time. And that's pretty amazing to say, with church planning being right there too. But
yeah, man. Well, pastoring's hard as it is. So tell us a little bit about the area that your church is in. How's it made up? What's the mindset of people, that kind of thing?
So upstate New York is in that northeast, kind of as you go further north. They say it's a little harder territory, but it really is. I don't necessarily think it's hard territory. I think it's the fields are as white as into harvest. And so I think the area is economically shrinking. And so there's this kind of weight over the area from that. In fact, truthfully, there was a 72 flood before I was around that still is a major point of history in a negative way for this area. But it's heavily Catholic, and a lot of churches closing. But there's so much opportunity to see people's lives transformed and changed. And so we have, it's kind of a rural setting with a little bit of city, depending on which community you're in. And so a lot of different opportunities that way.
There are how many, like, thousands as far as around you? What's the demographic numbers around you?
So in our county, there's 90,000 or just under 90,000. The county next to us, I think it's about 100,000. And so not heavily populated. But the percentage of people who are unchurched is very high. I think, the last I looked is like 20% claimed a faith affiliation, but that was a little while ago, so I haven't looked at it lately.
And that's just the claimed.
Right. That's why I say the claimed. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you do ministry there, what is your, what's your focus as far as what are you trying to accomplish with the church as your major drive?
So our DNA as a church is, one, we want to be relational. I believe for us, like, relationship is so critical. People are hungry for relationship. Pre-COVID, coming out of COVID, I think there are so many isolated and hurting people, and the way that we best impact them is through a environment that is very relational. So we've tried to create a building, a facility that felt like home. That's kind of our picture, is like, hey, you're coming home into this, like, a home where you feel like you can take your shoes off and live, like this feels like I feel a part of this. And so we try to make our events very relational. And although we could do large events, a lot of our outreach things are kind of in the smaller realm where we could get to know people and know their names, and people could invite their friends. And so we try to be, a lot of our, we do some camping weekends, so we can develop deeper relationships that way. And so we do relationship, and we want to love our community well. And so we try to engage our schools by partnering with them as best we can. One of the things that we had some people who are very good at is making chicken. And so we're like, how
Praise
do we
the Lord, man.
making that fireman chicken barbecue? How can we make that a kingdom building thing? And so for the last, I don't know, I almost say 15 years, almost since we started, we've been giving away free chicken dinners, an event that way. So this last year, I think we gave away 650 chicken dinners to our community. And now we get people calling us saying, when's your
Is this an annual
your
thing
party
you
and
do?
celebration? Yeah, it's annual. In
So
fact, what our
what
goal
time of
is
year
now,
do you do that?
we do it June, July timeframe.
Okay, so it's not.
And
It's not
now what we're
competing with
trying to
something
do,
else. Yeah.
yeah. What we're trying to do is take it to other churches and be like, hey, we're going Ithaca. Maybe there's a church we're partnering with Ithaca as they're planting. Hey, can we serve you by doing a free dinner for your community that way? The other part is discipleship and developing people. I think we have really tried to work hard at helping people become disciple makers, trying to invest in them, saying that you don't just sit in a chair waiting, receiving a message. We really want you investing relationally in other people, both in outreach, but also in discipleship. Who are you investing in? Who are you having conversations with? Who are you kind of asking great questions with? And the other part is trying to find people's unique design. I believe everyone has a calling, both specific and general, and we really want people to discover who they are and how they can best use their gifting in a way that builds God's kingdom here in the Northeast. And so whether it's in business, whether it's a church planter, whether it's someone in retirement who's looking for not just to play golf, but using their retirement in a way that they get to see God do amazing things, that their greatest decade will be in retirement, is what we're trying to communicate well with people.
So here's what I want you to do. You hit a very important nerve there, because every church I talk with talks about discipleship, but very few do it. Is there a program, a process? If someone were to come to you today and say, okay, Michael, you guys have a great discipleship thing happening. Can you kind of share with me how you do that? Can you kind of give us the nuts and bolts of that? Because see, I've firsthand seen your church. I was there. I saw how your people served. I saw their attitudes. I was blown away because I don't see that as much, especially on this side of the pandemic. Your church seems to be very healthy. And so a lot of churches are trying to figure out discipleship. So how did you develop it, or is there a way you can explain it to us so that other people could do what you do?
For us right now, we're in the DNA stage, which means I think we fall in love with tools too quick without having the DNA behind the tool that makes it work. Any tool can work sometimes. I wouldn't say any, but you can use any tool, but the DNA is critical. So I've been trying to invest heavily. So we have discipleship nights where we talk specifically about disciple making and talk about the DNA behind it. And I use different words sometimes. Rather than using disciple making with them, I'll use the word invest, because I think they look at themselves and say, I don't know enough to be a disciple maker. I need to be discipled. I can't disciple someone else. But if you use the word invest, anyone can invest relationally in somebody else. It's not about what you know, it's about what you can give. And so we've been trying to give tools in our discipleship nights on, okay, how do you live out the DNA? So it's not necessarily a Bible study. It is asking great questions. It's about hearing someone's story. It's about using your story to speak into someone else's story. And then really it's intentionality, like encouraging our people to have both one that is not yet a follower of Christ that you're investing in, and those that are followers of Christ, and being intentional about those relations. We also talk about, like, it's not adding something into your schedule. It's taking your calendar and doing it where you're at. So if you're at work 40 hours a week, you can be very intentional within the boundaries of what work allows you to do to invest in a disciple making, kingdom building thing. And so what is that? How do you use your lunches? How do you use some emails to check in with people? Like, sometimes it's not necessarily, you might get to a Bible study with somebody, but there's a lot of pre-ground work that you have to do in order to build that relationship to be able to invest that way. So we talk, again, it's a relational thing. So we talk a lot about relationship. How are you intentionally using that relationship to help them take their next steps in the faith.
Do you have a group of leaders that you're pouring into that help you do this, or are you still kind of driving everything?
A little bit of both. I mean, I because I am the senior leader, I want them to know that I'm doing it, and this is important to us. And so if I just handed it off, I don't think they would understand how important this is to the health of our church. And so I try to both model it. I'm investing in people, investing, and I lead a small group that's investing in people, and then I have leaders that are doing it really well. Then obviously up front, I'm celebrating stories.
Mm-hmm.
So our youth leader has done an incredible job investing in some of our high school kids at that time, but who are now college students.
Yeah.
Those college students are now investing in other college students or other young people. And so that 3 generations, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully a 4th generation will come, is what we're celebrating. Like, look what's happening, and you got grandparents of like you have that flow of like someone who's discipling someone, and it gives us a chance to celebrate that and be like, hey, look what's happening. This is what we want to see.
How do you celebrate it?
One, we tell stories. We have them up front. We kind of use our communication pieces, whether it's social media or email, and be like, this is some of our celebration points. It could be outreach sometimes. It could be some of the other core values that we have, but sometimes it's discipleship.
You're not,
And this
are
is
you
what we're
saying
seeing
like
happen.
during your service that you're doing this, or is that how you?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Like
And then obviously
videos
if
and
it's
stuff.
Sometimes videos. Yep. But during November, we were doing a special series on things, so we use some videos and let them speak too. Let our young people speak into what God's doing in their life. So,
all right. So I got to ask you. So how do you? And I hate to use this word, but how do you control the when you turn a microphone over to somebody to give a testimony? Sometimes those things come off the rail. You know what I'm saying? Or sometimes they last 20 minutes.
yeah.
How do you make it fit within the boundaries of a service?
That is challenging. I think I've had more issues with that on a
That's why I
Sunday
was asking you about
morning
video.
Yeah. We have done video. I think I try to see what they're saying first and try to make sure that they have it's when people who try to be off the cuff that get themselves in trouble, and then they just spin. So I try to like read their story first, give them some feedback. I know your story, and so here's some pieces that I think you should highlight a little more. Take this piece out. And then I usually say, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, but I know that'll be up to like 7.5. Does it make sense? Like I know it's going to be longer than what I tell them.
Pastors can't even keep up with time. So that people who don't do this all the time have a hard time with it. So I got a funny question I want to ask you, but let's take a short break and we'll be right back. And then I want to ask you a question.
Sounds great.
Back here with Michael, just talking about how God's using his church in upstate New York. Specifically, he's developed a great discipleship pathway, if you will. So here's what I was going to ask you. So give me a story where an example where you gave someone the microphone on Sunday morning and it just came off the rails.
I had a missions guy, and so we have missions moments. Like they celebrate some overseas things,
mm-hmm.
and he was making an announcement. He was kind of communicating what's happening in a certain area. One of our I think he shared every piece of what was happening in that country, and I think it went on 15 minutes. And you probably can't see in the podcast, but I'm trying to get my fingers like, come on, speed it up. I'm standing up now. I'm like trying to get to the mic, and the honest truth is I didn't let him have a mic again after that, because it went on and on. And if a pastor's ever been there, it is just like, how do you cut someone off? Like, how do you get that mic out of their hands?
So I've been doing ministry for 40 something years. So let me go ahead. Anybody that needs an example of what to do, here's what you do. Cause I had this senior, wonderful lady in the church that I pastored, and every now and then she'd want to share a testimony and it would fit. But she always would get up and say things like, well, here's what the Lord's telling me. And when she would do that, I'm telling you, the first 5 minutes was just spot on, man. You could tell. But at some point you could see where she kind of settled in a little bit and like, enjoyed holding that microphone. And then it was like, and when she said, and then I'm going, okay, we just left what the Lord said, and now she's just going to talk. So I just moved closer to her, and I'd put my arm around her shoulder, and then I'd eventually reach up, put my hand on the microphone with her while she's just talking, and oh, isn't that great? Yeah. And I just kind of slowly pull it away. Because here's the problem with that. So, and it's, when you said a missionary, it makes me think about so many times I've sat and listened to missionaries come to tell, and I know what they want to do. They want to unload everything they, experience because they got one shot. But for those who are watching the podcast on YouTube, I think I have a 12-ounce cup I'm holding up right now. You can pour 64 ounces into it if you want to, but it ain't gonna hold but 12.
Right.
And I find that happens a lot when, with that kind of testimonial thing. On the flip side,
And then I would say,
go ahead.
I would just say too, vision wise, you give everything. You're not casting a great vision.
No.
The less sometimes is more. It's a whole elevator spiel, right? Like
Yeah.
you should be able to say it in an elevator ride, and people will walk away sometimes with a less detail but a clearer vision than more
Sure.
detail and no vision.
Well, that's what we do when we do vision days with churches. It helps them to understand that with their mission. So on the flip side, give me an example where you had someone share and it's just like, man, God shows up.
I think this was Good Friday service. What we did, where we kind of, I just invited our young people, and sometimes with the young people, you don't know what you're gonna get.
Mm-hmm.
Like it could be really short. It could be like very nervous.
Yeah.
But you have to give them opportunities. And so, man, I have never sat back and been so proud to watch our young people share scripture. And we only gave them 5 minutes, like each. So we did kind of like, I think we had like 5 young people sharing. And so we do worship on five like a young person, 5, and a young person, do some worship in between. And they just, the giftedness of those young people, and to sit back and be like, man, it's just a beautiful thing. They're not only sharing scripture, but they're sharing their story inside of scripture. And the beautiful part for me was that it was such coming from a humble spirit. Like, it wasn't like, look at me, I'm sharing. It was like, let me just point you to God. Let me just point you to Jesus. And it was just one of those moments where you're like, our discipleship that we've been doing with our young people is paying. I mean, we're doing some incredible things.
It sounds to me like you never lost your love for those 40 kids that you had.
No, that's why we wanted something for them. So, and I believe that long term, the church's health is, the kingdom's going to be built by our young people. The more we invest in them, the more I believe that God's going to do incredible things, not just now, but in the next generation.
So if a pastor's listening right now and they're in a typical church that we run into with 95 Network, where the entire focus is inward, the majority of the focus is on people who've been saved or who claim to have been saved, I'll say it that way, for for the last 40 years. The entire focus is on adults, and they're kind of like, we just need some young people, but they don't do anything to connect with young people. What would you tell them?
One is hopefully there is a young person or 2 young people in the church. Invest in what you have. I think Jesus says this: be faithful in the little, and he will give you more. How are you discipling that one young person? How are you investing in that? What opportunities are you given with them to serve and use their gifting? Like, you don't need a full youth ministry to disciple. In fact, I don't think you even need your leadership's permission to disciple. I think whether your leadership gets it or not, as a pastor, you can walk in and say, I'm gonna invest in that young person. I'm gonna bring them along. I think and then the pastor models it, and hopefully that young person gets it, and then you have a story to celebrate. And all of a sudden, I call it like flywheeling, like a merry-go-round. If you ever ridden a merry-go-round, it starts really slow, but it can go pretty fast with little effort. Sometimes it's momentum. I think you start with the 1 or 2, and then invest in them and see the momentum slowly shift, where those young people might bring somebody else into the church, and then you have 2 or 3. Momentum gets going, but you don't wait for perfect circumstance to get started. You start with what you have.
Well, what if I'm a 50 or 60-year-old pastor? How do I relate to a teenager?
Most young people actually want someone to invest in them. I don't think I don't think the age is a factor necessarily. I think it's like parenting, right? If you're a parent, you understand this, that you have to find ways to connect with your kids. Like it changes as they grow up. So with my oldest son, we played baseball. We played catch in the backyard. That was our converse. We started conversations that way. With my daughter, it was volleyball. And then now we kind of do some retreats together. Like we teach at retreats. And my son, it's mountain biking. I think you just find ways to relationally connect. And by the way, everyone likes to eat. I have yet to find a person who does not like to go to a coffee shop or at least a McDonald's or Burger. A young person who, hey, can I take you out for a soda? And then you just ask great questions. Hey, what happened at school today? Obviously activity is even better. Like if you find something that you can do like that's fun together, but even meals. I think you just kind of start building slowly the relationship, try to find what works.
It sounds to me like this is too simple. I mean, come on now. It's got to be harder than this.
Yeah, maybe we're making it too simple.
No, I'm very proud of what you are doing. And honestly, the truth is, as a leader, you have to have a heart for young people if you're going to connect with young people, because they'll sniff you out so quick if they think you're just going through the motions. And for me personally, and I mentioned this on a previous podcast, I think my parents modeled this for me. But all my best friends are young. The people I hang around with are, they're in their 30s. I'm in my 60s. One, it keeps me young, but and then to be very honest, a lot of people my age are just waiting to die. It's kind of like, okay, let's retire and die. Come on, guys, there's a lot of life to live. But the point is you've been very intentional about this since day one.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say I was intentional from day one. I think you learn a lot through 17 years of ministry too. Like, I wish I was more intentional. I wish I had spent more time developing leaders rather than developing a crowd in the beginning.
Well, that's what was modeled for us, though. That's what we were taught back then.
Right. Launch large and all that. I think it was year 2. I realized that I'm going to burn myself out if I keep building a crowd without building leaders and disciples. And so I still wanted to reach people, but I had to reach people through also developing people. And so I think that's where that shift was, realizing I had greater opportunity for long-term difference to have great leaders.
You appear to be very healthy. As far as a pastor, a leader, I mean, and you're very, you seem to be very aware of your highs and of your goods and your bads, your gifts, where you struggle. How have you stayed healthy all these years?
One thing is, again, I know we've talked about this at the Soul Care Conference, which I really appreciated when we talked about it, is Sabbathing. I just don't know of a greater command in Scripture. Like, how cool is it that God said, "Hey, take a nap, rest," and why we feel like we can't do that, I have no idea. But my wife and I take Thursdays, and it's our date day. It's our maybe take a nap day. It's our spend some time together, do some things that I love. Sometimes get on my lawnmower, ride around a little bit, and get the lawn mowed. And it may sound like work to some, but for me, it's like the place of rest.
My best sermons came on lawnmower.
My best ideas do too. So, I think if we don't take a Sabbath, what we're saying is God needs us more than he really does.
Yep.
It's the whole tithing principle, really. We believe that 90% with God is more than 100% without him. So I think that day of rest is big. I think in this last season, coming out of COVID, I realized that having good people around, like outside of the church, like having people that you can process grief with, trauma with, hardship with is huge. I think you can have cynicism walk into you and your wife's life with church work. You get hurt so many times that you kind of lose your desire to be in relationship with anyone else, and so you can almost hibernate. Yeah, and I think it takes a battle to get out of it, and it also takes what family are you part of? Like, where do you find that place where it's outside the church where you can just be you and share some of those things and laugh? I think I've come this last season, I'm like, the church needs to play more. I think we need to laugh more. Like, I think there's a beauty to having fun and letting.
There's not just a beauty. There's an attractiveness to people who don't know Jesus. I've often wondered, I've thought about, if we were more just enjoyed life more and actually showed the benefits of being a Christian, I think we'd have a much more attractive connection with people who don't know Christ. But uh, to be honest with you, it seems like a lot of times Christians just mean or
Right.
Christian leaders,
Well, I think it's because we're so goal oriented. Like at least I am.
Mhm.
So it's like hiking. You get to the top. You want to get to the top of the mountain. Get to the top of the mountain.
Mhm.
Get to the top of the mountain. And then we get to the top of the mountain. You're like next mountain up. Next mountain up. I have to work hard to enjoy the journey. Like there's beauty. There's adversity, but there's beauty all along the way. And
Yeah.
so to find those places is a beautiful thing.
Pastors have been programmed to be this way. There's no doubt about it. It's part of what we catch. It's what we caught. It's also what's been taught in seminary in their training, that somehow we're supposed to be separate. And again, we are the leader. I get that, but we're not anti-human. We are human still, and and Jesus modeled this for us. He would often get off by himself or go talk to the Father or get away from it all. But it's just to me, it's one of the biggest things that I see God dealing with now on this side of the pandemic. We do the Soul Care Conference, and in some places we go, it's like your place. It was just great, good crowd, the whole thing. Some places we go, we don't even get to do the conference because pastors are quote unquote so busy they can't even come to a half day conference, and they don't know how to stop. They don't know how to shut it down because they think that's part of the calling, and it's not. Was this just natural to you, or did someone kind of speak this into your life?
Well, I talked about the coach I had in the beginning, and I think he laid some great DNA in that. And someplace along the line, and I think I told my wife along the way, I said, I am not good at finding my boundaries. Like she needs to speak where it becomes unhealthy. And so she's always had that open conversation of like, you're shifting too much. You're doing too much. I need you to not give out every night of the week. I need you to be home. So we have these like, it's a tension sometimes, not in a negative tension, not like we're fighting over it, but like she has to, the pendulum swing. She needs to bring my pendulum back to where it is. And so she has freedom to speak that into me. And then I think it's partly because I've enjoyed it. Like, not only did we start practicing it, but then I'm like, I love my Thursdays. And therefore I'm going to protect my Thursdays because I love my Thursdays. And there's so many beautiful pieces to it.
I know for me with Sabbath, especially, this, everybody on the podcast doesn't necessarily know, but my wife and I are literally building a new home right now. And when I say we're building it, we are literally doing the building. I grew up building. And so, I mean, I've done some things in the last few years or last few months as a 60-year-old man that I'm like, I thought these days were behind me. but man, knowing that Sabbath is coming for us, knowing that we have that day off, and I have protected it even in the building, as we lead 95 Network and do it, I'm like, I still got to have that day off because I'm not worth anything. And I will tell you this, being just completely transparent, in my 40 plus years of marriage, the biggest mistakes I've made have always been when I was exhausted, when I was completely fried, and I get to a point where, I know, I know what to do and I just don't do it because I'm too tired to care. And so I think it's very important to have that Sabbath to look forward to every week.
Yeah, I think the other side too, not only knowing what to do, but like sometimes that you have to step into a situation and you just don't have the energy to step into it. So it's like, I have to deal with this. I don't want to deal with it. And so it's both sides.
Yeah, and you can lose your way in your ministry just because you're exhausted, because you ignored something that God instituted in creation, because He instituted the Sabbath in creation. So as we kind of move towards the end of the podcast, I want to ask you this: and the years you've been doing this, talk me through a couple of your highest highs and then a couple of your lowest lows.
I'll start with the lows. I think I had a good friend, someone who's involved in ministry, leading our marriage ministry, who I found out was a sexual addict and was having inappropriate relationships. And so I tried to walk alongside him in that. And I'm not a big church discipline. I don't like that language for me. I like church restoration. I like how am I restoring
inside the church or outside the church? This person
outside the church.
Okay, all right.
Outside the church. And so I'm like trying to like do the restoration process, and he just wouldn't receive it. And so I almost pushed back to the point of like, I wouldn't say causing division, but but getting there, like trying to stir things. And I think it was hard, not just, I felt like we walked it right, but it was just hard because you're losing a friend, like someone that you invested in, someone that you, and then there's the little ones, so there's the big ones. And I think the other lows are just good friends who leave the church without even telling you why. All of a sudden they're gone.
Yep.
Like, did I do something? Like, I thought we did small group together. Your kids swam in my swim pool. We ate meals together. Like, at least sometimes you just don't understand why people don't have conversations with you. You are just, heartbroken by the relational hardship of that.
I would imagine that's the biggest thing we all go through, because again, it'd be better if they just cussed you out and told you sucked. Absolutely. But they don't do that. They just don't say anything. Right. And it's like, it leaves it open-ended.
Yeah. And then we talked about the cynicism, but that's the hard part too, is then you get cynic about any relationship. And so you have to work so hard. The other, again, these are just examples of sometimes you have to make a leadership decision that has relational consequences.
Yes.
It's the right leadership decision, but when you're a relational person, it's hard. You lose relationships sometimes because you have to make a leadership decision. I think those are some of the hardest decisions. No one's wrong. Like, they're not in the wrong.
Yeah.
But you have to make a leadership decision. Highs. Every year we have our baptism celebration we go camping for a weekend as a church. And every year we have a baptism celebration, whether it's 7 to 15, whatever it is. I stand back and I think, wow, God, you've been so good. That we're at this point. And so, again, in my mind, I see the picture of the number of people sitting around. Again, numbers are they're numbers. But each of those numbers has a story, and I know their stories, and I sit there thinking, man, God, you have allowed me to be part of their story. You've allowed me to see the church start from, my wife and I, to 6 couples, to the next, launching at 120 and then shrinking to 60, and the whole story of that, and the whole Jenga. I always considered, especially early ministry, the Jenga game, where it feels like you're like one piece from it all collapsing.
Yep.
And I stand at that moment, and I'm like, God, I just can't believe that I get to watch this and to hear we usually have them share their stories of why they want to be baptized, what God's been doing, basically their testimony, and to hear it over and over again. And I think this is why you go through all the hard things, is because of stories like this. Like every year, I'm in tears. I'm going. The other cool part is we go underneath the waterfalls. We have a lot of waterfalls in upstate New York, so we baptize underneath waterfalls, and no one gets to hear what I'm saying out there, but I'm talking to the person I'm baptizing, and I'm like, man, it's just a beautiful moment for me. Like, I'm so proud that you've invited me into your story to see your life change.
Yeah, that's cool.
Just I'll just give you one more quickly. Like, there are so many times we call them only God stories. Like, only God can show up. Like, we moved from portable church to building a facility, and through crazy situations, God gave us a grant for $400,000 to build a building. And we're like, that's only God. God allowed us to sell a piece of property that we bought for $5 for $50 within 6 months. Like, some of those are little and some of those are big. Like, just only God story after only God story. And those stories only really make until you understand the adversity that's a pastor walks through to get to those only God stories. Do you really understand how great those only God stories are? If that makes sense. Like, sometimes we only celebrate the only God stories. Oh, wow, you got $400,000. But the years of prayer, fasting, waiting, doors closed, they make those only God stories sweeter. And so, like, I guess I would say, if you're in those waiting moments, I still believe that God has a story for you. Like, I believe that does not that's not going to stop what God's doing. It's just making the story better.
I used to talk all the time when I was pastoring about the and suddenly moments where God would do, something was happening and suddenly God does this. But,
Yeah.
but the and suddenly moments are preceded by years of building to that
Right.
moment. What happens in the moment is never just what happened in the moment. It's just the culmination of what you've been pushing toward and praying for or
Yeah.
hoping for. And sometimes it's just God doing it. So as we wrap up the podcast, I want to ask you to do this. So there's a pastor, a youth pastor, a board member, or someone on staff, someone in church right now. They are just at the point where they're not experiencing a lot of joy. That they don't have momentum. The church is either flat or dying. And they're just trying to decide how we want to keep doing this, and this is happening all across the country in alarming rates right now. If you're sitting down with them at that coffee shop, you got 5 minutes to talk to them, and they're like, I just don't know if I need to keep going. What would you tell
One, I would stop and say, Matthew 11, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That there are times where you need to pause and just like kind of take a Sabbath. Sometimes you need longer than a Sabbath. Sometimes you need a longer vacation in a week. Sometimes you need a sabbatical. And none of those things are wrong. And sometimes you need counseling, and that's not wrong. That's a good thing. Sometimes you have gone through your own trauma and own pain, and that you have to unravel before you can step into the next season. And so, one, I would say, don't be afraid to pause and rest and find where Christ wants you to take you next. Maybe you need a mentor, a guide, someone that's going to challenge. But I would start there. Two, don't despise small beginnings. You never know when God's gonna show up in an amazing way. He may not. He doesn't necessarily promise to, and sometimes you get the privilege of seeing it. But our faithfulness does play out over time. And so I would just say keep investing in one or two. Like Jesus had circles, right? He had the 5, he had the 5,000, the 72, the 12, the 3. Make sure you're investing in 3 really well, really heavily. Maybe have a 12. Like these are the people that you see something in and you want to like kind of like pour into. But those believe that those investments matter, and you might not be able to see it in your tenure, but someone else, they might be taken from your church. They might leave. But we always hold people at our church loosely because we believe we're sending them into wherever God sends them next. And so like God gives and God takes away. And we have to be good with that. But it doesn't mean that our faithfulness and that commitment to investing in a few doesn't matter.
That's such great advice. In fact, what I did, Michael, in our church, when we closed our church after pastoring for 12 years and I was not healthy, it wasn't healthy. I took 5 years off and went back into construction thinking that maybe ministry was over for me because I was not in a healthy place. I was in such a bad place mentally and then later discovered physically, which led to my, heart surgery at 53. All that's because of ministry. All that's because of the pressure. And it wasn't necessarily just outside pressure. Some of it, the majority of the pressure that Dale has lived with, Dale put on himself. And that's why, and I didn't Sabbath well, and I didn't take breaks well. And, now I understand that to go on vacation now, I need to go on vacation for 2 weeks because it takes 1 week to even realize I'm on vacation.
Me too.
But I just wanted to kind of jump on the backside of that and testify that I literally did what you said. And then, it was like when I'm kind of get to this place where, I'm good with whatever, God, that's when he began to open up other things. So, man, that's great advice. It's great wisdom. Man, I'm really proud of you and what you're doing a great job. You are a great model, I think, of what a healthy church can be, what a healthy pastor can be, what a healthy church ministry marriage can be, relationship with your kids. And I just appreciate you and what you're doing. I'm looking forward to us working together again in the future. Our soul care conferences that we did in that area they were so well received and helped a lot of folks. I've had a lot of good feedback from it. So just thank you for what you're doing. And thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Yeah. Thank you, Dale. I really appreciate the time and even your time investing in our people and investing in the soul care. It's such a critical issue today. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.